The night was cold and the sky hung low over Dust Creek when Caleb Morgan rode into town, his boots worn from miles and his soul heavier than the horse he rode. Folks said a man could buy anything in this town if he had enough whiskey or enough pain, and Caleb had both. He came not for land, not for gold, but for silence, the kind that heals or kills, depending on what's left in a man's heart. The saloon lamps flickered against the frost-bitten windows when he saw them, a drunken husband shouting, a woman standing still as stone beside him. Her name was Clara, though she didn't say it. The man called her his wife, his burden, his useless, sterile widow, who couldn't bear a child to save her life. Caleb didn't know then that the word sterile was a lie that heaven itself would one day undo. The husband slammed a half-empty bottle on the counter, spitting words soaked in shame and liquor. "You want her," he barked, laughing. "Give me $10 and she's yours. She can't give no man a future, might as well give her a home." The crowd chuckled, cruel and hollow. Caleb's hand moved to his pocket without thought. He wasn't buying a woman, not in his heart. He was buying peace, maybe redemption. The coins clinked on the counter, and the man staggered out into the night. Clara didn't look at Caleb, she just whispered, "You didn't have to." But he did. The good book said mercy comes in many forms, sometimes as a stranger's hand in the dark. That night, the wind moaned through the prairie as they rode to Caleb's ranch, miles of quiet land and one creaking house built by a man who'd buried more dreams than cattle. He showed her the spare room, offered bread and coffee, then left her to rest. She didn't thank him, didn't speak, just stared at the fire like she was afraid it might leave her too. Days passed slow. Clara worked the kitchen, tended the hens, mended torn shirts without being asked. She moved quiet, graceful, like a prayer whispered between chores. Caleb began to notice the small things. How she hummed when the sun rose, how her eyes softened at the sight of the barn cat nursing her litter. There was a sadness in her smile, but it carried warmth too, the kind that could thaw the hardest frost. One evening, as rain whispered against the window panes, Caleb found her sitting by the hearth with a Bible open on her knees. "You believe in second chances?" she asked softly. He paused, his rough hands resting on the back of a chair. "Don't know," he said. "Never been given one." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time you took yours." The fire popped, shadows danced, and something changed between them, not love, not yet, but understanding. They didn't speak of the past. Some things the wind carries better than words. But the house that once echoed with loneliness began to sound like home. Spring rolled in quiet, with fields green and skies kind. Clara's cheeks grew fuller, her laughter less guarded. The town still whispered, said Caleb had bought himself a barren wife, a ghost of a woman. But one morning, Clara stumbled in the garden and pressed a trembling hand to her belly. The color drained from her face. When she told Caleb, she could hardly breathe. "It can't be," she whispered. He said, "The doctor said I couldn't." Caleb's world stilled. The man who'd buried his faith in a dry well found it springing up again, wild and real. He took her hand, rough against hers, and said, "Maybe the good Lord don't care what men say. But news travels faster than light in small towns, and whispers turn to laughter." Men joked at the saloon that Caleb's sterile widow must have found another way to get with child. Clara stopped going into town. She'd stand on the porch at dusk, hands folded over her belly, tears shining like dew in the lamplight. Caleb knew what they were saying, but he didn't ask, not once. Love, real love, doesn't cross-examine pain. Still, something gnawed at him late at night. The doubt, the question, the echo of her husband's laughter the night he'd sold her. He'd told himself it didn't matter, but the silence between them began to weigh like unspoken truth. One night, when thunder rolled over the plains and the rain came like God's own tears, Caleb woke to find her gone. He ran barefoot through the mud, calling her name, his voice breaking against the storm. He found her by the barn, clutching her belly, her dress soaked through. "I didn't betray you," she cried. "I swear on my soul, Caleb, this child, it's yours." He dropped to his knees beside her, rain washing the dirt from his face. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I never stopped believing." And then, beneath that storm, with the world shaking around them, something holy passed between them, forgiveness, faith, and a love that defied reason. When morning came, the rain had stopped. Clara lay sleeping, her face peaceful, her hand resting where new life stirred beneath her ribs. Caleb sat beside her, the weight of doubt finally lifted. He looked out across the land, his land, their land, and felt something he hadn't in years. hope. The town would keep talking, as towns do, but he no longer cared. He'd bought what the world called broken and found in it something whole, something eternal. The months that followed were quiet, yet heavy with the kind of silence that tests a person's heart. Clara's belly grew, and with it, so did the talk. Folks at the general store smirked when Caleb walked in. Heard miracles happen in Dust Creek, one man laughed, slapping the counter. Or maybe someone else did the Lord's work for him. Caleb didn't respond. He simply paid for flour and nails, his jaw set tight. But at night, when the prairie wind whispered through the cracks in the old house, those words echoed back like ghosts. Still, every time he saw Clara sewing by the fire, humming softly, the doubts faded like morning mist. He'd look at her, hand resting on her belly, and think, no matter what they say, she's mine. The ranch began to bloom under her care. The hens multiplied, the cows calved strong, and even the soil seemed softer under her touch. Neighbors started noticing, some with envy, others with curiosity. One afternoon, old preacher Harlan rode up, tipping his hat. "Caleb," he said, eyes kind but searching, "the Lord's been known to bless the barren before. Sarah, Hannah, perhaps he's done so again." Caleb nodded, though his chest ached with things he couldn't name. That night, he told Clara what the preacher said. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Then maybe I ain't the only one getting a second chance." But fate has a way of testing blessings. One hot afternoon, a rider came down the dusty road, wild-eyed, coat torn, stinking of whiskey and regret. Clara froze when she saw him. Caleb's hand went to his revolver. The man dismounted, stumbling forward with a bitter laugh. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, voice slurred but sharp. "You didn't waste time, did you, Clara?" It was her husband, the drunk who'd sold her like cattle. He pointed at her swollen belly. "Guess you weren't as barren as the doc said." Caleb stepped between them, calm but ready. "You lost your right to speak her name the night you sold her." The man sneered. "Sold? I lent her. Seems you just took the lease too serious." Before Caleb could move, Clara's voice cut through the heat, trembling but fierce. "You lied to me, Sam. You knew I wasn't barren. You said it so I'd stay quiet while you drowned yourself." Sam laughed, eyes glinting. "Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But if that's my child, I reckon I got a claim." The words struck Caleb like a hammer. Clara stepped back, tears welling. "He's not your anything," she said. "You gave me away, and God gave me another life." Sam spat in the dirt. "God don't rewrite bills of sale, sweetheart." He turned, mounted his horse, and rode off, but not before shouting over his shoulder, "I'll be back. And when I do, I'll take what's mine." That night, the sky burned red with sunset, and the air felt thick, like the land itself was holding its breath. Caleb sat outside, rifle across his knees. Inside, Clara wept quietly, her body trembling with both fear and shame. "I should have told you," she whispered when he came in. "He told me I was barren after I lost our baby. Said I broke something inside. I believed him." Caleb knelt beside her, took her hand, and said softly, "You didn't break. You just got hurt. There's a difference." She looked up, tears glistening like stars. "You still believe this child's yours?" He smiled faintly. "It doesn't matter what I believe. I know." The days turned into a kind of waiting, for the baby, for the storm, for whatever the Lord had written next. Caleb reinforced the barn doors, cleaned his rifle, and prayed for peace. Clara, despite her fear, began to sing again, quiet songs that filled the house like warmth after winter. She told Caleb about her first child, the one she'd lost in a fever years ago, and how she thought God had punished her. "But maybe," she said one evening, "he was just saving me for the right man." Caleb said nothing, only brushed a lock of hair from her cheek. Sometimes love didn't need words. Then came the night of fire. Sam returned, drunker and meaner, with 2 men and a torch. The cows bawled, the horses kicked, and the barn lit up like Judgment Day. Caleb ran out barefoot, rifle in hand. "Sam," he shouted, but the man just laughed, waving his flame. "She's mine. You hear me? You can't buy what ain't for sale." The rifle cracked once, a thunderclap that silenced the night. When the smoke cleared, Sam lay in the mud, his breath shallow, eyes glazed with shock. Caleb dropped the gun, horror flooding him. "I didn't mean to," but the words wouldn't come. Clara stumbled forward, clutching her belly, crying out his name. And then, as if heaven itself answered, the pain seized her, her time had come. Caleb carried her inside, his hands shaking. "Stay with me," he whispered. You're safe now. She gritted her teeth, gripping his arm, tears streaming. Outside, the rain began to fall, putting out the fire. Inside, life fought to begin. Hours passed in agony until finally, a cry rose, small, fierce, alive. A son. Caleb held him, trembling, then looked to Clara. She smiled weakly, eyes glimmering through tears. See, she whispered, told you, the Lord don't care what men say. Her hand fell limp against his arm, and for a terrible moment, Caleb thought she was gone. But then, a breath, faint but steady. She lived. When dawn came, the land was quiet again. Smoke curled from the blackened barn, and the sun rose gold over the ashes. Caleb buried Sam behind the ridge without ceremony. He wasn't proud, wasn't angry, just tired. Inside, Clara slept beside the newborn, his tiny hand wrapped around her finger. Caleb sat watching, the light catching in his weary eyes. For the first time, he felt something close to peace. Maybe the world would still whisper, maybe the preacher would still question, but the truth was simple, love had given them both a reason to live again.